Captain Jake Morrison stood at the window of his ship, watching the huge space station grow larger as they got closer. The station looked like a metal city floating in space, with lights blinking all over its surface. Ships from dozens of different alien worlds were docked at its many ports. Some ships looked like crystals, others like giant seashells, and some had shapes that hurt his eyes to look at. "There it is," he said quietly to himself. "Concordia Prime, the place where they decide if we're good enough." His ship, the UES? Harmony, was small compared to most of the alien vessels around the station. It was built for diplomacy, not for war, with meeting rooms and cultural exchange centers instead of weapons. Jake had been its captain for 2 years now, flying between human space and the rest of the galaxy, trying to build bridges that seemed to crumble faster than they could be built. Dr. Lisa Grant walked up beside him, carrying a thick folder of papers. She was the ship's expert on alien cultures, a woman who had spent years learning how to talk to beings that didn't even breathe the same air as humans. Her job was to help humans understand aliens and help aliens understand humans. It was not an easy job. "The council meeting starts in 3 hours, she said, her voice tight with worry. "I've read through all the reports again." "It doesn't look good, Jake." Jake nodded. He had read the reports too. For 3 years, humans had been what the council called probationary members. That meant they were allowed to attend meetings and make suggestions, but they couldn't vote on anything important. They were like children at an adult table, expected to be quiet and grateful for being allowed to listen. "What's the worst they can do?" Jake asked, though he already knew the answer. "They can extend our probation indefinitely. They can add more restrictions. They can limit where our ships can go and what we can trade." Lisa's voice got quieter. "They can kick us out entirely." Ambassador Kate Phillips came onto the bridge, dressed in her formal diplomatic uniform. She was a woman in her 50s who had spent her whole career trying to build peace between different groups. Before the aliens came, she had worked to stop wars between human nations. Now she was trying to stop a war between humans and the rest of the galaxy. "Are we ready?" she asked, though she looked like she already knew the answer. Commander Rick Sullivan joined them. He was the military representative, a man who had fought in several human conflicts before becoming a peacekeeper. His job was to protect the diplomatic mission, but also to observe alien military capabilities. He wore his dress uniform, but Jake could see the tension in his shoulders. "The alien delegates are already calling this meeting a formality," Rick said. "They've already decided what they're going to do." The 4 humans looked out at the space station where their fate would be decided. Each of them had worked for years to get to this point, to prove that humans deserved a place among the stars. Each of them was starting to wonder if it had been worth the effort. 2 hours later, they were walking through the corridors of Concordia Prime. The station was a marvel of engineering, with different sections built for different types of aliens. Some areas were filled with water for the aquatic species. Others were kept at freezing temperatures for beings that lived on ice worlds. The human section was small and tucked away in a corner. Like an afterthought, the council chamber was enormous, with seating arranged in a complex pattern that showed who was important and who was not. The oldest and most powerful species sat in the center on platforms that raised them above everyone else. The newer species sat in rings around them, with the newest and least important members placed furthest away. The humans sat in the newcomer section, a small area with basic chairs and no special environmental controls. Around them, alien delegates chatted in languages that sounded like music or grinding metal or rushing water. The translation devices in their ears turned the sounds into words, but the tone always came through as cold and dismissive. Zixtara entered the chamber, and all conversation stopped. She was the current Council Prime, the leader of the Vulcan species. She looked like a giant insect with 4 arms and compound eyes that seemed to see everything at once. Her species had been traveling between stars for thousands of years, long before humans had even invented the wheel. "We gather today to discuss the status of the human species," she announced, her voice clicking and chittering before the translator turned it into words. After 3 years of observation, we must decide if they are ready for full membership in our council. Other delegates began to speak. Morden of the Shard Coalition was next. His species looked like living crystals, beautiful and strange. His voice sounded like wind chimes when he spoke. The humans show concerning patterns, he said. They fight among themselves frequently. They develop weapons faster than they develop wisdom. They refuse to accept guidance from their betters. Velthor of the Deep Current Empire spoke next. His people lived in the oceans of their world and wore water-filled suits when they traveled in space. Humans act without thinking, he said. They make decisions based on emotion rather than logic. They are unpredictable. One by one, the alien delegates spoke about humanity's failures. They talked about human wars, about human stubbornness, about human refusal to follow council rules. They showed reports about human colonies that had been built without permission, human ships that had traveled to forbidden areas, human scientists who had conducted experiments that the council had not approved. Ambassador Phillips sat quietly. Through it all, her face showing nothing. Dr. Grant took notes, writing down every criticism, every complaint. Commander Sullivan's jaw got tighter with each speaker. Captain Morrison watched the faces of the aliens around them, seeing the same expression on all of them. Disappointment mixed with superiority. Finally, Zixtara called for the vote. All in favor of extending human probationary status for another 5 years with additional restrictions on expansion and trade. Hands, claws, tentacles, and crystal formations rose throughout the chamber. The vote was not even close. Only 2 species voted against the motion, and they were small, weak species. That had no real power in the council. The motion passes, Zixtara announced. Humanity will remain under probationary status. New restrictions will be implemented immediately. The meeting continued for another hour, with the council discussing exactly what those restrictions would be. Humans would not be allowed to establish new colonies without council approval. Human ships would be subject to additional inspections. Human trade would be limited to approved partners. Human scientific research would be monitored and regulated. Through it all, the 4 humans sat in silence. They had known this would happen, but hearing it made it real. They had spent 3 years trying to prove that humans deserved respect. And the council had decided that humans deserved to be treated like dangerous children. When the meeting finally ended, the human delegation walked back to their ship without speaking. Other alien delegates chatted and laughed as they left the chamber, but no one spoke to the humans. They might as well have been invisible. Back on the U's Harmony, the 4 humans sat in the captain's quarters, looking at each other across a small table. Outside the window, alien ships continued to come and go from the station, conducting the business of a galaxy that had decided humans were not worthy to join. 3 years, Lisa said finally. 3 years of trying to prove we belong, and this is what we get? 5 more years of the same, Rick added. 5 more years of being treated like we're not good enough. Ambassador Phillips looked older than she had that morning. Maybe we're not, she said quietly. Maybe we really are too violent, too emotional, too unpredictable. Captain Morrison stood up and walked to the window. He watched an alien ship that looked like a giant flower petal drift past, its crew probably heading home to a world where they were respected and valued. Maybe the problem isn't that we're not good enough, he said. Maybe the problem is that we're trying to be good enough for the wrong people. The others looked at him, but he didn't explain what he meant. He wasn't sure he understood it himself yet. But something had changed in that council chamber. Something had broken that couldn't be fixed with more diplomacy or more patience. Outside, the galaxy continued to spin, full of wonders and opportunities. But for the first time, Jake Morrison found himself wondering if humanity's future lay among the stars they could see, or among the ones they couldn't yet imagine. 3 months after the council meeting, Captain Jake Morrison received another message that made his blood boil. The cargo ship carrying medical supplies to the human colony on Kepler 442b had been stopped again by council inspectors. This was the 4th time in 2 months. They're searching every container, the cargo captain reported over the communication link. They say they need to verify that we're not carrying unauthorized biological materials. It's going to delay us by another week. Jake closed the communication channel and rubbed his temples. The colony on Kepler 442b was dealing with an outbreak of fever among the children. The medical supplies were desperately needed, but the council's inspectors seemed to find new reasons to delay every shipment. Dr. Lisa Grant walked into his office carrying a stack of rejection letters. Her face was grim, and Jake could see the frustration in her eyes. "More rejections?" he asked. 12 research proposals, all turned down, she said, dropping the papers on his desk. The council says our methods are unproven and our conclusions are speculative, but Jake, these are breakthrough discoveries. We found new ways to treat diseases that have plagued alien species for centuries. Jake picked up one of the rejection letters. It was from the council's medical research division, rejecting a human proposal to share a new treatment for a nerve condition that affected 3 different alien species. The letter was polite but dismissive, stating that human medical knowledge was insufficiently advanced for council consideration. "What about the collaborative research projects?" Jake asked. Lisa's expression grew darker. "That's the worst part. I've been going through the data sharing agreements. The council has been taking our research and giving it to their own scientists. They're publishing papers based on our work without giving us any credit." Jake felt his hands clench into fists. "Are you sure?" "Unsure. Remember the crop enhancement project we worked on with the Shard Coalition? The one that could increase food production by 30%? They published the results last month under purely Shard authorship. Our contributions were mentioned in a single footnote." Commander Rick Sullivan entered the office, and Jake could see from his expression that he had more bad news. "The council has rejected our request to establish a research station in the Vega system," Rick said. "They claim it would interfere with established trade routes, but there are no established trade routes through that system. They're lying." Jake stood up and walked to the window. Outside, he could see another human ship being escorted by council security vessels. The escorts were supposedly for protection, but they looked more like guards making sure the humans didn't go anywhere they weren't supposed to. "It's getting worse," Rick continued. "The council has implemented new safety protocols for human vessels. We have to file flight plans 3 days in advance. We can't deviate from approved routes. We can't land on any world without written permission." Dr. Grant sat down heavily in a chair. "They're treating us like criminals," she said. "Like we're dangerous animals that need to be contained." The communication system buzzed, and Ambassador Kate Phillips appeared on the screen. She was calling from the council station, where she had been trying to negotiate better terms for human activities. "I have news," she said, but her voice was tired. "The council has agreed to consider our request for expanded trading rights." That's good news," Jake said, though he could tell from her expression that it wasn't. "There are conditions," Kate continued. "All human trade must go through council-approved intermediaries. We can't deal directly with other species. The council will take a 30% commission on all transactions. And all trade goods must be pre-approved by council inspectors." Rick swore under his breath. 30%? That's highway robbery. It gets worse, Kate said. They want to station council observers on all human colonies to ensure compliance with galactic standards, they say. Jake felt something cold settle in his stomach. Observers? You mean spies? That's what they mean, Kate agreed. They want to monitor everything we do, everything we say, everything we build. The communication was interrupted by an urgent message from the outer rim. Jake accepted the call, and the face of Dr. Maria Santos appeared on the screen. She was the head of the medical mission on Titan Station, a mining facility that served multiple species. Jake, we have a situation, Maria said. There's been an outbreak of Rigelian plague on the station. It's spreading fast, and the council medical team can't stop it. Jake leaned forward. What do you need? We have a treatment that works, Maria said. We've tested it on human volunteers, and it's completely effective. But the council is refusing to let us use it on the alien patients. Why? Dr. Grant asked. They say human medical treatments are unproven on alien biology. They're worried about side effects. Meanwhile, people are dying. Jake felt his anger rising. How many? 47 dead so far, and the number is growing every hour. Jake, we could save them. We have the cure right here, but the council won't let us use it. The screen went blank as the communication ended. Jake stared at the empty screen, feeling something break inside him. They had the cure for a deadly disease, but the council would rather let people die than admit that humans might know something they did in single quotes 2 weeks later. The situation on Titan Station had become a disaster. The death toll had reached over 200, and the council's medical team was still struggling with treatments that weren't working. The human medical team watched helplessly from their quarantine section of the station, knowing they could save lives but being forbidden to act. Dr. Grant received a message that made her slam her fist on her desk. They're shutting down the agricultural project on New Eden, she told Jake. The council says our crop modifications are potentially dangerous and need to be studied for another 5 years. New Eden depends on those crops, Jake said. Without them, the colony will starve. The council says they'll provide appropriate food supplies, Lisa replied. At triple the normal cost? Rick came running into the office, his face pale. Jake, you need to see this. The council has just announced a new policy. He handed Jake a data pad with the official announcement. Jake read it twice, not believing what he was seeing. They're relocating our colonies, he said. 3 of them, Rick confirmed. New Montana, Haven, and Prosperity. They say the worlds are needed for a Vulcan expansion project. The human colonists have 6 months to evacuate. Jake felt his world spinning. These weren't just colonies, they were homes. New Montana had been settled for 15 years. 3 generations of families had built their lives there. Haven was an agricultural world that fed 5 other human settlements. Prosperity was a manufacturing center that provided jobs for thousands of people. What about compensation? Lisa asked. The council generously offers to relocate the displaced humans to suitable alternative locations. Rick read from the announcement. The alternative locations are all in the Outer Rim on worlds that barely support life. Ambassador Phillips called an emergency meeting that night. The 4 humans sat around the table in Jake's quarters, looking at each other with expressions of defeat and growing anger. I've been trying to negotiate with the council for 6 months, Kate said. Every time I think we're making progress, they add new restrictions, new demands, new humiliations. They don't want to negotiate, Rick said. They want us to submit. They want us to be grateful for whatever scraps they throw us. Dr. Grant was looking through her research notes. I've been documenting everything, she said. Every rejection, every delay, every insult. The pattern is clear. They're not trying to help us integrate into galactic society. They're trying to break us. Jake stood up and walked to the window. Outside, he could see human ships being escorted by council security forces, human crews being subjected to humiliating inspections, human colonists being forced to abandon their homes. Maybe it's time to stop trying to prove we belong, he said. Quietly, the others looked at him. What do you mean? Kate asked. Jake turned back to face them. I mean, maybe it's time to stop begging for acceptance from people who will never respect us. Maybe it's time to stop trying to fit into their galaxy and start building our own. Dr. Grant closed her research notes. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that we've been approaching this all wrong, Jake said. We've been trying to prove that we're good enough to join their club. But what if we don't need their club? What if we can build something better? Rick leaned forward. You're talking about leaving? I'm talking about recognizing reality, Jake replied. The council has made it clear that they don't want us as equals. They want us as servants, as junior partners who do as we're told and are grateful for the privilege. Ambassador Phillips was quiet for a long moment. If we leave, they'll say we're proving their point. They'll say we're too emotional, too impulsive. Let them say it, Jake said. The question is, do we want to spend the rest of our lives trying? To prove them wrong, or do we want to build something that makes their opinions irrelevant? Outside the window, another human ship was being boarded by council inspectors. The crew stood with their hands visible, like criminals being arrested. Jake watched the scene and felt something harden in his chest. The message went out on a frequency that most aliens never monitored. It was a simple code that human ships had used for years during their exploration of space. To anyone listening, it would sound like routine maintenance chatter or navigation updates. But to human captains across the galaxy, it was the signal they had been waiting for. Captain Jake Morrison stood in the communication center of the U's Harmony, watching as the responses came in. One by one, human ships acknowledged the message. From the mining stations in the Outer Rim to the research vessels studying distant stars, every human crew confirmed they had received and understood the instructions. "All ships report ready," Lieutenant Don Cooper said from his station. "Phase 1 can begin whenever you give the word." Jake looked around the room at his crew. These were good people who had spent years trying to build bridges between humans and the rest of the galaxy. Now they were about to burn those bridges down, not with explosions or angry words, but with something far more powerful. Silence. "Begin Phase 1, Jake said. Across the galaxy, humans began to move. But they moved quietly, without fanfare or announcements. Dr. Lisa Grant packed up her research equipment from the Joint Xenobiology Lab on Kepler Station. She worked methodically, taking only what belonged to her and leaving everything else exactly as she found it. Her alien colleagues didn't even notice she was leaving until they found her empty desk. The next morning, on the mining station where the plague had killed so many, Dr. Maria Santos finished treating her last patient. The human medical team had been forbidden to help the aliens, but they had continued to treat the human workers. Now that the last human patient was healthy, Maria quietly shut down the medical bay and loaded her equipment onto a transport ship. Ambassador Kate Phillips was in the middle of a negotiation with the council when she received the signal. She was sitting across from 3 alien delegates, discussing new restrictions on human trade routes. In the middle of the meeting, she stood up, gathered her papers, and walked out without saying a word. "Ambassador Phillips," one of the delegates called after her. "We haven't finished the discussion." Kate stopped at the door and turned back. "Yes, we have," she said simply. Then she left. The pattern was the same everywhere. Human researchers completed their current projects but didn't start new ones. Human traders fulfilled their existing contracts but didn't sign new ones. Human diplomats attended scheduled meetings but didn't schedule new ones. Human medical teams finished treating their current patients but didn't take new ones. At first, the aliens didn't notice. The council was too busy with their own politics to pay attention to what the humans were doing. Zixthora was dealing with a dispute between 2 member species about mining rights. Morden was focused on a trade agreement with a new species that had just been discovered. Velthor was managing a crisis in his own territory. The first sign that something was wrong came from the plague-stricken mining station. The station commander, a crystalline being named Shardsinger, sent a desperate message to the Council Medical Division. "Our approved medical team has made little progress," the message said. "The death toll continues to rise. We request permission to use the human medical treatments that were previously offered." The Council's response was swift and bureaucratic. The human medical offer had been rejected as unsuitable. The station would need to wait for the next scheduled medical supply shipment, which would arrive in 6 weeks. But when the station commander tried to contact the human medical team, he discovered they were gone. The UES medical vessel that had been orbiting the station for months had simply vanished. The human doctors who had been watching helplessly as people died were no longer there to ask for help. Similar discoveries were being made across the galaxy. The human agricultural specialists who had been working on crop improvements suddenly weren't available for consultation. The human engineers who had been maintaining critical systems were nowhere to be found. The human traders who had been facilitating commerce between different species had simply disappeared on New Montana. The human colonists were packing. They had been given 6 months to evacuate, but they weren't waiting. Families who had lived There for 15 years were loading their belongings onto transport ships. The terraforming equipment that had turned the harsh world into a garden was being carefully dismantled and removed. "Where are they going?" asked the Velkin overseer, who had been assigned to monitor the evacuation. "Away," replied Colony Administrator Ben Harris. It was the only answer he gave. The evacuation of New Montana was happening faster than anyone had expected. The council had assumed the humans would fight the relocation order, would demand hearings and negotiations. Instead, they were leaving, quietly and efficiently, taking everything they could carry and destroying nothing, but they were taking more than personal belongings. The advanced hydroponic systems that had made the desert bloom were being carefully disassembled. The atmospheric processors that had made the air breathable were being loaded onto cargo ships. The fusion reactors that had powered the colony were being shut down and removed. Commander Rick Sullivan oversaw the military aspects of the withdrawal. Human defense satellites were being quietly deactivated. The early warning systems that had protected several star systems from pirates were being shut down. The patrol routes that human ships had been flying for years were being abandoned. "What about the security agreements?" asked Colonel Sarah Kim, who was coordinating the withdrawal of human forces from the Outer Rim. "The Council never formally recognized our security role," Rick replied. "As far as they're concerned, we were just flying around for our own amusement. So we're going to stop amusing ourselves." The withdrawal was happening so smoothly that most aliens didn't realize it was happening at all. Human ships were simply not where they used to be. Human personnel were simply not showing up for work. Human services were simply not available anymore. Dr. Grant was in her laboratory, copying all of her research data onto secure drives. Years of work on alien biology, on interspecies communication, on medical treatments that could save lives. Across the galaxy, she was taking it all with her. "Lisa, what are you doing?" asked Dr. Chirpsong, her avian colleague who had worked with her for 2 years. "I'm finishing my research," Lisa replied without looking up from her work. "But we have 3 more experiments scheduled," Chirpsong said. "The Council approved our proposal to study the symbiotic relationship between—" "The Council can study it themselves," Lisa interrupted. "I'm sure they'll figure it out eventually." Chirpsong's feathers ruffled with confusion. "I don't understand. Are you taking leave? Are you being reassigned?" Lisa stopped her work and looked at her colleague. Chirpsong was a good scientist and had always treated her with respect. But she was also a member of a species that had voted to keep humans in probationary status. "I'm leaving," Lisa said simply. "The research data belongs to me. The methods belong to me. The discoveries belong to me. And I'm taking them with me." She finished copying her files and deleted everything from the laboratory computers. Years of groundbreaking research vanished in seconds. The economic impact was the first thing the Council noticed. Human-owned businesses were closing their offices on Council worlds. Human trading companies were terminating their contracts. Human manufacturing facilities were shutting down production. Velther was the first Council member to raise concerns. The Deep Current Empire had been benefiting greatly from human agriculture technology. Human innovations had increased their food production by 40%. But now the human technicians were gone, and the systems they had installed were starting to fail. "We need to contact the human trade representatives," Velther said during an emergency council session. "Our food production is beginning to decline." But when the council tried to contact human trade representatives, they found that the offices were empty. The communication channels were still active, but they only played recorded messages thanking the Council for their cooperation and wishing them success in their future endeavors. Morden tried to contact the human research teams that had been working on crystal matrix improvements. The research had been close to a breakthrough that could revolutionize Shard Coalition technology. But the human scientists were gone, and they had taken their research with them. "This is unacceptable," Morden declared. "The research was conducted using Council resources. The humans have no right to take it." But when Council security forces investigated the abandoned research facilities, they found that the humans had been meticulous. They had taken only their own equipment, their own data, their own discoveries. They had left behind anything that belonged to the Council, but they had taken everything that belonged to them. Zixtara was beginning to realize that this wasn't a typical diplomatic dispute. The humans weren't protesting or demanding negotiations. They weren't making angry speeches or threatening retaliation. They were simply leaving. "Get me a status report on all human activities," she ordered her staff. The report, when it came, was shocking. Human participation in council activities had dropped by 90% in just 2 months. Human trade had virtually stopped. Human research projects had been abandoned. Human colonies were being evacuated. The first ship to die was the cargo vessel Crystal Wind, carrying supplies between the Shard Coalition homeworld and their mining colonies in the Outer Rim. It was traveling through the Serpentine Passage, a dangerous route through an asteroid field that required precise navigation. For 3 years, human ships had been maintaining gravitational stabilizers along the route. The technology was something humans had developed to make space travel safer. They had quietly installed the devices and maintained them without asking for credit or payment. The stabilizers kept the asteroids from shifting into the shipping lanes, but the human engineers were gone now, and the stabilizers were failing. "Captain." Shard Bright felt his ship shudder as it passed through an unstable gravity field. Warning lights flashed on his bridge as chunks of rock that should have been held in place came drifting into the shipping lane. "Navigation, plot a course around the debris," he ordered. "Captain, the debris field is too large," his navigator replied. "The safe passage has collapsed." The Crystal Wind tried to turn away, but it was too late. A piece of asteroid the size of a city block struck the ship's hull. The impact shattered the crystal structure of the vessel, killing all 300 beings aboard. The news of the disaster reached the Council within hours. Zixtara called an emergency meeting to discuss what had gone wrong. "The gravitational stabilizers in the Serpentine Passage have failed," reported the Council's chief navigation officer. "The shipping route is no longer safe for travel." "How is that possible?" Morden demanded. "Those stabilizers have been working perfectly for years." "That's the problem," the navigation officer replied. "We don't know how they work." "They were installed and maintained by human engineers. Now that the humans are gone, we can't fix them." Velthor leaned forward in his water-filled chamber. "Are you telling me that our shipping routes depend on human technology that we don't understand?" The uncomfortable silence that followed was answer enough. Similar crises were erupting across the galaxy. On the agricultural world of Greenfield, the crops that fed 6 different species were dying. The plants had been developed by human scientists to grow in soil that was too poor for normal farming. But the genetic modifications were complex, and the alien farmers didn't understand how to maintain them. Dr. Chirpsong, the avian scientist who had worked with Dr. Grant, sent desperate messages to every communication channel she could find. "We need the human agricultural data," she pleaded. "The crop failure will cause famine across 3 star systems." But there was no response. The human research teams were gone, and they had taken their knowledge with them. The medical crisis was even worse. Hospitals across the galaxy were discovering that many of their life-saving treatments had been developed or improved by human doctors. The techniques had been shared informally, taught during joint medical missions, or demonstrated during emergencies. The plague on Titan Station had mutated again, and now it was spreading to other worlds. The Council's medical teams tried to replicate the human treatment that could have stopped the outbreak months ago, but they didn't understand the underlying science. Dr. Wingbright, the avian head of Council Medicine, reviewed the reports with growing horror. "How many treatments were dependent on human knowledge?" he asked his staff. "We're still counting," came the reply. "But it appears to be most of our recent advances in interspecies medicine." The economic collapse was happening faster than anyone had predicted. Human businesses hadn't just left the galaxy, they had taken their customers with them. It turned out that humans had been facilitating trade between species that couldn't communicate effectively with each other. The thermal worms from the desert worlds had been selling heat-resistant materials to the ice builders from the frozen planets. But the two species couldn't speak to each other directly. Their languages were too different. Human translators had been making the deals possible. Now the translators were gone, and the trade deals were falling apart. Council economist Shard Calculator presented his analysis to the emergency session. Human-facilitated trade represented approximately 37% of interspecies commerce, he reported. The loss of this trade volume is causing economic disruption across 43 worlds. The security situation was deteriorating rapidly. Human patrol ships had been quietly protecting shipping lanes from pirates for years. The Council had never officially asked for this protection. They had just assumed the humans were patrolling for their own reasons. Now the patrols were gone, and the pirates were getting bolder. The merchant vessel Deep Current was attacked while carrying medical supplies to a Council world. The pirates took everything and left the crew floating in space in emergency pods. It took 3 days for a rescue ship to find them. Where were the patrol ships? Demanded Captain Tiderunner when he was rescued. There are no patrol ships, the rescue captain replied. The humans have withdrawn all their security forces. Reports of pirate attacks were flooding in from across the galaxy. Trading ships that had traveled safely for years were now being robbed and destroyed. The Council's own military forces were spread too thin to provide adequate protection. Communication networks were failing too. The advanced translation systems that allowed different species to understand each other had been upgraded with human linguistic software. The humans had studied how different alien minds processed language and had created algorithms that made translation more accurate. But the algorithms were proprietary human technology. And without regular updates and maintenance, they were starting to produce errors. Simple misunderstandings were turning into diplomatic incidents as species misinterpreted each other's words. The crystalline delegation accused the aquatic empire of planning an invasion based on a mistranslated message about expanding their sphere of influence. The aquatic empire thought the crystallines were threatening war when they talked about shattering old agreements. Both sides began mobilizing their fleets before wiser heads realized the translations were wrong. Zixthara called another emergency session, but this time the mood was different. The confident superiority of the Council members was gone, replaced by worry and confusion. We need to assess the full extent of our dependence on human contributions, she announced. I want reports from every department, every world, every facility. The reports, when they came in, painted a picture that horrified the Council. Humans had been involved in virtually every aspect of galactic civilization. They had contributed to medicine, agriculture, transportation, communication, security, and trade. But their contributions had been so quiet and unassuming that no one had noticed how essential they had become. It's like they were the oil in our engine, Velther said during a private meeting with the other senior Council members. We never noticed it was there until it was gone, and now everything is grinding to a halt. Morden's crystal form flickered. With agitation, this cannot be correct. The humans were probationary members. They couldn't have been this important to our civilization. But they were, Zixthara said quietly. They were fixing our problems, solving our challenges, making our lives better. And we treated them like inferior children who needed our guidance. The worst news came from the intelligence division. Long-range sensors had detected unusual activity in the void between galaxies. Massive construction projects were underway, using technology that the sensors couldn't identify. The energy signatures are unlike anything in our databases, reported Intelligence Chief Shardsight. The construction appears to be on an enormous scale. We estimate the project involves millions of human workers and thousands of ships. What are they building? Zixthara asked. We don't know. Our sensors can't penetrate their shielding technology. But whatever it is, it's bigger than anything ever constructed in galactic history. The realization was sinking in that humanity hadn't just left the galaxy in anger. They had left with a plan. They were building something new, something that didn't need the Council's approval or permission. A junior aide burst into the chamber, his avian feathers ruffled with excitement and fear. Council Prime, we're receiving a transmission from the Outer Rim, the mining colony on Zarian 7 is under attack by raiders. They're requesting immediate military assistance. Zixthara looked around the chamber at the faces of the council members. They all knew the same thing. There were no ships available to send. The human patrol vessels that would have responded to such a call were gone. The council's own forces were tied up dealing with other crises caused by the human withdrawal. Send what ships we can spare, she ordered. Though she knew it wouldn't be enough Daz, the aide left to carry out her orders, Zixthara stared out at the stars. Somewhere out there, beyond the reach of council sensors, humans were building their future. And for the first time since she had become Council Prime, she wondered if that future might be brighter than the galaxy. They had left behind. The great civilization that the Council had been so proud of was starting to crumble. And the species they had dismissed as too primitive to deserve respect were proving that they didn't need the galaxy's approval to thrive. They just needed to be left alone to do what humans did best, build something better from nothing. 6 months after the humans disappeared, the galaxy was falling apart. Captain Shard Warrior stared at the wreckage of what had once been the merchant fleet Golden Current. Pirates had attacked the convoy just outside the Centauri system, destroying 12 ships and stealing cargo worth millions of credits. The attack had happened less than 50 light-years from a major council world in space that should have been completely safe. "Any sign of council patrol ships?" asked his second officer. "No," Shard Warrior replied grimly. "The nearest council vessel is 6 days away. The pirates will be long gone by then." The Outer Rim had become a war zone. Without human patrol ships keeping the peace, criminal gangs were raiding with impunity. Trade routes that had been safe for decades were now death traps. Many shipping companies had simply stopped making runs to the frontier worlds, leaving entire colonies without supplies. The mining colony on Zarian 7 had been completely destroyed. The raiders had taken everything of value and left the survivors stranded on a barren world. By the time council rescue ships arrived, half the population had died from exposure and starvation. Similar attacks were happening every day. The council's military forces were stretched so thin that they could barely protect their core worlds, let alone patrol the vast expanses of space that humans had once watched over. Dr. Chirpsong stood in what had once been a thriving agricultural research station on Greenfield. Now it was a monument to failure. The crops that had fed billions of beings across 6 star systems were dying in the fields. Brown, withered plants stretched to the horizon, victims of a genetic modification that no one understood how to maintain. "The soil analysis shows nutrient depletion," reported her assistant, Dr. Wing Sharp. The human-modified plants were designed to extract specific minerals from the ground, but they also needed regular genetic adjustments to prevent exactly this kind of failure. Chirpsong picked up a handful of the dead soil. It crumbled through her feathers like ash. "How long before the famine reaches the inner worlds?" 2 months, maybe 3, Wing Sharp replied. "The food reserves won't last longer than that." The agricultural crisis was spreading faster than anyone had predicted. World after world was reporting crop failures as human-developed plants died without proper care. The council had tried to hire agricultural experts from other species, but none of them understood the complex biotechnology that humans had created. Emergency food shipments were being sent to the affected worlds, but there wasn't enough to go around. Riots had already started on 3 planets as populations fought over dwindling supplies. In the council medical center on Concordia Prime, Dr. Wing Bright reviewed the latest casualty reports with growing despair. The plague that had started on Titan Station had now spread to 17 worlds. The death toll had reached 2.3 million and was climbing every day. "We've tried every treatment in our medical database," reported his chief researcher. "Nothing works against this strain. It's mutated beyond our ability to treat." Dr. Wingbright stared at the medical file that haunted his dreams. It contained the human treatment protocol that could have stopped the plague in its early stages. The file had been rejected by the Council Medical Board as unproven and potentially dangerous. Now, 6 months later, he knew it was their only hope. "What about reverse engineering the human treatment?" he asked. "We've been trying for months," his researcher replied. "But we don't understand the underlying science. The humans approach medicine differently than we do. They thought about diseases and treatments in ways that our minds can't grasp. The plague was just the beginning. Hospitals across the galaxy were discovering that many of their standard treatments had been improved or developed by human doctors. Without human medical knowledge, their ability to treat interspecies patients was collapsing. The Council had established emergency medical committees to try to recreate human advances, but their progress was painfully slow. For every day they spent trying to understand human medical science, hundreds more beings died from treatable conditions. The economic collapse was complete. The Galactic Trade Index had fallen by 60% in 6 months. Major corporations were going bankrupt as supply chains that had worked for decades suddenly failed, Velther floated in his council chamber, reading report after report of commercial disasters. The aquaculture facilities that fed his people were failing without human biotechnology. The deep-sea mining operations that provided essential minerals for his civilization had shut down when human designed. Equipment broke and couldn't be repaired. The thermal exchange systems are operating at 30% efficiency, his economic advisor reported. Without human maintenance, they'll fail completely within the year. Velther's tendrils curled with frustration. How did we become so dependent on a species we considered inferior? They weren't inferior, his advisor said quietly. We just told ourselves they were because it made us feel better about our own limitations. The social unrest was spreading as fast as the plague. On world after world, populations were rising up against their governments. The beings who had once supported the Council's decision to restrict humanity were now demanding that their leaders bring the humans back on the crystalline world of Shard Prime. Massive protests had forced the resignation of 3 government ministers. The crowds chanted slogans demanding the return of human trade partners and human medical expertise. "We want the humans back," had become a rallying cry across dozens of worlds. The Avian Confederation had withdrawn from 2 council committees in protest of the treatment of humanity. The Thermal Worm Republic had threatened to leave the council. Entirely if human relations weren't restored immediately, even species that had never directly benefited from human cooperation were feeling the effects. The failure of human maintained infrastructure was causing ripple effects throughout the galaxy's interconnected systems. Morden stood in his crystal garden, watching his most prized formations crack and crumble. The resonance fields that kept his world's crystal structures stable had been enhanced with human acoustic technology. Without regular maintenance, the ancient formations that defined his people's culture were literally falling apart. "How long before the capital city collapses?" he asked his chief engineer. "Perhaps 2 years if we're lucky," came the reply. "The foundational crystals are already showing stress fractures." The same story was repeating across the galaxy. Critical systems were failing, essential services were collapsing, and entire civilizations were facing extinction because they had driven away the species that had been quietly keeping everything working. The worst news came from the intelligence networks. Long-range scanners had detected more human construction activity in the void between galaxies. Whatever they were building was enormous, larger than entire star systems. Energy readings suggested technology far beyond anything the Council possessed. "They're not coming back," Intelligence Chief Shardsite reported to an emergency council session. "The construction appears to be a permanent settlement. They're building a new civilization completely independent of our galaxy." Zixthuras' compound eyes reflected the emergency lighting of the council chamber. Half the member species were no longer attending meetings. The ones who did come spent their time arguing about whose fault the crisis was instead of trying to solve it. "What are our options for contact?" she asked. "We've tried every communication channel we know," Shardsite replied. "And there's no response. It's as if they've completely cut off all ties to our galaxy." The chamber fell silent. For months, the Council had been telling themselves that the humans would eventually calm down and return to negotiations. The idea that humanity might simply move on and build something better without them was too terrible to contemplate. A junior aide rushed into the chamber, his crystalline form flickering with urgent energy. Council Prime? Urgent message from the Outer Rim. The Therian system is under attack by a massive pirate fleet. They're requesting immediate military assistance? Zixthora looked around the chamber at the handful of remaining delegates. They all knew the truth. There were no ships to send. The Council's military was fighting a dozen other crises caused by the human withdrawal. How many ships do the pirates have? She asked. Over 50 warships, the aide replied. They're well armed and organized? This isn't a random raid, it's a coordinated invasion. The realization hit everyone in the chamber at the same time. Without human security forces maintaining order, the galaxy's criminal elements were growing bold enough to challenge entire star systems. What had started as isolated pirate attacks was evolving into something much worse. Send what forces we can, Zixthara ordered. Though she knew it wouldn't be enough. As the aide left to carry out her orders, Zixthara stared out at the stars. Somewhere in the darkness between galaxies, humans were building their new home. They had taken their knowledge, their innovation, their solutions to galactic problems, and they were using them to create something that didn't need the Council's approval. The great galactic civilization that had rejected humanity was dying, and the species they had dismissed as too primitive for full membership were proving that they didn't need the galaxy at all. They had found something better: freedom. 2 years after the human departure, Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the observation deck of New Terra, watching construction ships add another section to humanity's greatest achievement. The massive space habitat stretched beyond the horizon, a gleaming city of metal and crystal floating in the void between galaxies. Section 47 is complete, reported Chief Engineer Lisa Grant, walking up beside him. We now have space for 12 million people with room for expansion. Jake smiled as he watched children playing in the habitat's parks, their laughter echoing through the corridors. These were kids who had been born free, who would never know what it felt like to be treated as second-class citizens by alien bureaucrats. Any word from the exploration fleets? He asked. Captain Sullivan's team found 3 more habitable systems in the Andromeda Spiral, Lisa replied. All uninhabited, all perfect for human colonization. We'll never run out of room to grow. New Terra was everything the Council had said humans couldn't build. It was a marvel of engineering that supported millions of people in complete comfort. Advanced manufacturing centers produced everything the population needed. Closed-loop agricultural systems grew food more efficiently than any planet-based farm. Revolutionary energy systems provided unlimited clean power, but it was more than just a space station. It was proof that humans could build something better than what the galaxy had offered them. Dr. Lisa Grant had made discoveries that amazed even her. Working without Council restrictions, human scientists had unlocked secrets of consciousness, of faster-than-light travel, of energy manipulation that bordered on magic. Every breakthrough built on the last, creating a cascade of innovation that showed no signs of slowing. The medical research team has another breakthrough, she told Jake. They've developed a treatment that can cure 90% of known diseases, including the plague that's still killing aliens back in the galaxy. Jake nodded, but felt no satisfaction. The plague had now killed over 5 million beings across 23 worlds. The human medical teams could have stopped it 2 years ago with a simple treatment, but the Council had been too proud to accept help from inferior humans. Meanwhile, the galaxy they had left behind was collapsing faster than anyone had predicted. The Council chamber on Concordia Prime was nearly empty. Only 5 species still attended regular sessions, and even they came more out of habit than hope. Zixthara sat alone at the center of the vast chamber, staring at empty seats that had once held representatives from dozens of proud civilizations. The Avian Confederation had withdrawn completely after the famine killed 30% of their population. The Thermal Worm Republic had dissolved into civil war when their crystal cities collapsed. The Deep Current Empire was barely functioning as their aquaculture systems failed one by one. "Council Prime," said her aide, Shard Whisper, approaching cautiously. "We've received another communication from the Outer Rim. The Polaris system has fallen to the pirate fleets." Zixthura didn't respond immediately. Polaris had been a thriving system of 4 billion beings just 6 months ago. Now it was under the control of criminal gangs who ruled through violence and fear. "Any word from our relief fleets?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "The fleet was destroyed 3 days ago," Shard Whisper replied quietly. "There are no reinforcements available." The Council's military had been reduced to protecting a handful of core worlds. Everything else had been abandoned to pirates, warlords, and chaos. The great galactic civilization that had existed for thousands of years was fragmenting into isolated pockets of desperate survivors. "Council Prime," Shard Whisper continued, "there's something else. Long-range sensors have detected human ships approaching the edge of our galaxy." Zixthara's compound eyes focused sharply. "How many ships?" "Just 3. They appear to be exploration vessels, not military craft." For a moment, Zixthara felt a spark of hope. Perhaps the humans were finally returning. Perhaps they could be. Convinced to help save what remained of galactic civilization, but the hope died quickly when she remembered the last communication the Council had received from human space. It had been brief and final. "This transmission channel is now closed." Still, she had to try. "Open a communication channel," she ordered. The main screen activated, showing the interior of a human ship. The captain was a young woman with kind eyes and graying hair. She wore a uniform that Zixthara didn't recognize, with insignia that spoke of an organization that had grown beyond anything the Council had imagined. "This is Captain Sarah Mitchell of the Human Confederation vessel New Horizon," the woman said. "We're conducting a peaceful survey mission along the galactic edge." Zixthara leaned forward. "Captain Mitchell, this is Council Prime Zixthara of the Galactic Cooperation Council. We ... Captain Mitchell's expression remained politely neutral. "I'm afraid I don't have authority to conduct diplomatic negotiations, Council." "Prime, my mission is purely scientific." "Please," Zixthara said, abandoning all pretense of dignity. "The galaxy is dying. Billions of beings are suffering. We made mistakes with your people, terrible mistakes. But surely you can see that innocent lives are at stake." Captain Mitchell was quiet for a moment, consulting with someone off-screen. When she turned back, her expression was sympathetic but firm. "Council Prime, I've been authorized to share some information with you. The Human Confederation has established successful settlements in 17 different galaxies. Our population now exceeds 50 billion and is growing rapidly. We have discovered wonders beyond imagination and built a civilization based on cooperation and mutual respect." "That's wonderful," Zixthara said desperately. "But what about this galaxy? What about the billions of beings who are dying because systems you maintained are failing?" "With respect, Council Prime, those systems were never our responsibility," Captain Mitchell replied. "We offered our help freely and it was rejected. We offered our friendship and it was spurned. We offered our partnership and we were told we weren't good enough." Zixthara felt her world crumbling around her. "We were wrong. We know that now. We want to make amends. We can offer you full membership, favorable trade agreements, anything you want." Captain Mitchell shook her head sadly. "Council Prime, the Human Confederation doesn't need membership in your organization. We've built something better. We've created a society where every member is valued, where cooperation is genuine, where no one has to beg for respect." "But the people who are dying," Zixthara pleaded. "Surely you have some compassion for innocent beings." "We do," Captain Mitchell said, "which is why we're offering refugee assistance to any beings who want to leave the failing systems and join our settlements. We've already evacuated 3 million refugees from the plague zones and another 5 million from the war-torn regions." The words hit Zixthara like a physical blow. The humans weren't just ignoring the galaxy's collapse, they were offering salvation to anyone smart enough to abandon the sinking ship. We're setting up temporary refugee processing stations along the galactic rim, Captain Mitchell continued. Any being or species that wants to start over in a better place is welcome to apply for citizenship in the Human Confederation. You're taking our people, Zixtara whispered. We're saving them, Captain Mitchell corrected. The same way we saved ourselves when we realized that this galaxy had no place for us. The transmission ended, leaving Zixtara alone in the empty chamber. Outside the station's windows, she could see ships departing, not human ships, but alien vessels carrying refugees toward the galactic edge where human rescue stations waited, the brightest minds. The most talented individuals, the most innovative species were all leaving. They were abandoning the failing civilization that had rejected humanity and joining the thriving confederation that humans had built in exile. Admiral Morrison received a report from Captain Mitchell later that day. The refugee processing is going faster than expected, she reported. We've had applications from entire planetary governments wanting to relocate their populations. Jake nodded. It was exactly what he had expected. Give people a choice between a dying civilization that treated them badly and a thriving one that welcomed them with respect. And the choice was obvious. What about the council leadership? He asked. Council Prime Zixtara made a personal plea for us to return and help save the galaxy, Sarah replied. I explained that we're not interested in saving a system that's fundamentally broken. We're only interested in saving the people trapped inside it. Jake looked out at New Terra, where beings from dozens of different species now lived and worked together. Former council citizens who had escaped the collapse and joined humanity's grand experiment in true cooperation. Any regrets? Lisa Grant asked. Joining him at the observation window. Jake watched a group of children playing together, human kids, young avians, crystalline juveniles, all laughing and learning together without anyone telling them they were too different to be friends. The only regret I have, he said, is that it took us so long to realize we didn't need their approval to build something wonderful.